Hello and welcome to another episode of Laptop Retrospective, and this is a machine that we all know and love very much. And this is, of course, the T430. This particular one, I have a live CD of React OS running, and this is a very sparsely equipped machine, this particular one. It is the Core i5-3320M, so about 2.6 gigahertz. It is currently also only operating 4 gigs of RAM. Like I said, it's a very light load, and this one in particular is plugged in because it has no battery currently installed. And you might say, well, why are you showing us this? Because you've already done a video on the T430, and that is 100% correct. And if you want to see it, look up there. This video is going to be focusing on what came next. And many of you will know and sigh because you know exactly what is coming. There was a refresh. Lenovo had been working on it for 9 months. And this would be one of the last generations that we would see of what many consider to be the classic IBM style ThinkPad. And what we would get would look something like this. This, ladies and gentlemen, is the T431s, probably one of the most disliked ThinkPads that would ever be made in small numbers. So let's go ahead and do a little bit of comparison and contrast between these two titans and find out why exactly the T431s, that's a mouthful, is not exactly a common machine and is not exactly that well liked. Stay tuned. So the T431s is a unique beast in the sense that it was the first laptop to be launched since the T400s with a massive redesign. And this would pretty much paint the picture for a lot of the future designs that we would see from Lenovo, including their ports, their features, and lack of both, for being brutally honest, especially when we compare them to previous generation machines. And for that reason, there's unfortunately more criticisms to levy against this machine than positives. It doesn't even feature a power bridge battery, for example. It's all internal. And this was during the time where the quest for thinness was on in a very real way. So of course we have the universal single-click trackpad. We have the chiclet style of keyboard. This would come with 0 graphics card options, unlike the other machines. The RAM was soldered on, 4 gigs to start with 1 DIMM slot, so you could get a maximum of 12 gigs. That was it. And it was also using a relatively underpowered U-series CPU, the i5-3337U. So in terms of ports, power, expandability, repairability, this machine pretty much did not do better than the T430. It was thinner and it was a little bit lighter, but that were really the only two things that this machine had going for it. And I wish that there was a bit more of a story, but this is kind of the beginning of a new generation or an end of a dynasty, depending on how you view your computer history. That being said, let's go ahead and do a quick comparison and contrast between these two machines, and then we'll do a very quick teardown of this particular unit so we can actually see what's going on inside. And I'll let you know right now, one of the complaints that this one got is that the touchpad and touch glass actually do get fairly warm to the touch, and I'm not actually even pushing it to do anything terribly complex. At any rate, let's go ahead and first make a quick stop to the BIOS to disable the battery via that setup before we go ahead and start the teardown process. So like I said, we need to make a quick stop to the BIOS, and we gotta find a way to disable that internal battery. Disable built-in battery. System will be powered down if you select yes. That's what I want to do. So before we begin our disassembly in earnest, let's go ahead and take a look at the port selection between this and the T430. So let's bring our comparative brick back into view. So looking at this side here, I'll just bring that into focus. We have a power connector on the bottom. We have Ethernet, VGA, USB port, SD card, and microphone headphone combo jack. This has a smart card reader. On the T430, we have 2x USB ports, display port, headphone microphone combo jack, VGA, and that's it. On the back, of course, of the T430, we have the standard barrel plug, we have our network, and our always-on USB 2.0. And on the other side, we have our SD card, hardware Wi-Fi, Kensington lock, USB 2.0, and of course the Ultra Bay. And if you want to see more about the Ultra Bay, up there. On the bottom, we have the USB 3.0 always on, as well as DisplayPort and the Kensington lock. So you can tell that there has been a reduction in ports and versatility, and that shouldn't be a surprise considering the reduction in size that we have happening here. It is not even a remotely comparable contest in terms of size, but in terms of weight, they're actually not doing too bad in terms of the difference between the masses. Okay, so we've already talked at length about the T430, so we are going to move that out of the way. And we are going to go ahead and disassemble, as much as we realistically can, the T431s. Now, one thing I will mention that is a little bit interesting is that this will actually mate with docks for the 20 and 30 series. So if you actually have your standard dock like this, it will actually work with this, even though you will need a traditional barrel plug power adapter to provide power to the laptop. It's also worth noting that this does not actually work. It ends up having to be like in the middle. If it's too far down, it doesn't really work. If it's too far up, it doesn't really work, at least on this one. So this is kind of an interesting little quirk that it is compatible with this. It's not like the T440 that changed the dock and connector size. It's still actually the same, and you can do port replication, which is really, really quirky. So the keyboard on this unit can actually be removed through the top, but it is buried in the maintenance manual, and the little tabs down here actually cause a unique phenomenon to happen. So if we do zoom in a great deal, we can see that this tab right here is what actually needs to be pushed forward. And what this will actually do is it'll move the entire keyboard bezel about 1 inch. Now, there are 2 tabs. You do that once on either side, and at that point it will start to expose, and you can see it just under the top of the control key. There is the actual screw head that you will need to remove, and there are 5 screws, I believe, located underneath, or is it 6? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Correction, 6 screws that need to be removed. Once all the screws are removed, the keyboard will lift out with our slightly modified keyboard wiggle maneuver. And then our ribbon cable is located underneath, and it has a very short leash indeed. You'll need to reach behind and flip up the black catch, and then the keyboard ribbon can be removed. There are 2 ribbons holding the keyboard in place, one for the track point and one for the keyboard itself. And there are the ribbons right there. And there are the keyboard ribbon retaining clips right there. The trackpad can also be removed, however, the battery needs to be removed from the other side, 6 screws removed, and then it'll fall out the front. Installation is the same as removal. The only thing that would change, of course, is once everything is connected back in, the bezel needs to be pushed downward to realign correctly for a proper typing experience. And it just goes to show you just how in between this machine really is. So let us go ahead and get our screwdriver and begin our entry plan. So as I mentioned, you've already seen the disabling of the battery. There is no external battery to remove, it's all internal. And it is highly recommended, of course, that you do disable the battery before you go on the inside of these machines, just for that extra safety. Interestingly enough, we do actually have a pictogram for the keyboard drainage, which is kind of interesting because if you've seen this keyboard, it doesn't really lend itself to like that much in terms of actual drainage. There is also a keyboard drainage hole down here as well. I would be really curious to know if there's anyone in the comments that's actually had one of these with water damage and how well it did, because I would be suspicious to see how well it would do. So now that we have our screws loosened, we can begin to pry up the case around the edges. Let's not forget that one screw by the dot connector. And there we go. Our lid comes off, and it would appear that all of our screws are captive, thank goodness. This is actually a very nice reinforced bottom. We do see a series of vents all over that are screened, which is nice. And a little bit of tape, probably just to keep the hard drive snug and in place. So let's put that off to the side and take a look at not much. All right. So starting down here, we do have the Lenovo battery, and this is a 48 watt hour affair. And as you can see, it pretty much takes up the bottom 2/3 of almost half of this particular machine. Everything that we really need is actually accessible, or everything that we can really use, I should say, does remain accessible. We do have an expansion port up here that is currently not being used. That would be for your WLAN. Our LAN card is hanging out right here, and it's an Intel Centrino Advanced, which is, I believe, the 6235. It is very tiny print. And here we have our only DIMM slot on the board. The rest of the RAM is actually soldered on to the main board. So if you wanted to get the maximum amount of RAM on this thing, it's 12 gigabytes, because this single slot will support up to 8 from what I've read, and the machine came wired with 4 on the board. You do have quick and easy access to your CMOS battery, and as you can tell, if you want to service anything beyond this, you are pretty much removing the entire motherboard. So this is not exactly what you would call convenient for any kind of deep or complex service, say like some of the other machines. This follows the X240, or the beginning of the X240, I should say, School of Design philosophy. We can see that our heatsink here is actually readily available, and it is bolted down, of course, to our CPU. Our battery connector in this case is hiding under a piece of tape. So let's go ahead and get a closer look at some of these components. So our battery connector, like I said, is located under, is in this case entirely taped. That is the entire cable. So to remove that will require a significant amount of careful wiggling. This bar is right up against the connector, which makes this actually surprisingly difficult to do. There we go. So that should cut the battery power as we move around. Like I said, this is the CMOS battery, and it is held in place right up there. Our single RAM slot, again, maximum support, 8 gigs. Moving over, pardon me, I gotta find myself in the camera. There's our WAN, or pardon me, LAN, or Wi-Fi. This is the WAN expansion slot. It's one of the unique mid-size, not longer size that you would normally expect to see. Carrying on over here, like I said, this is where our copper heatsink is feeding up into our single fan, which is exhausting out the right-hand side. Our speakers are actually located at the rear of this unit by the hinge. They are backward firing, which is an interesting choice, but when it comes to ThinkPads, I'm never really surprised by the obscurity that they usually approach their audio choices with, shall we say. And then, of course, down here to our hard drive, we have a single screw holding this bracket into place. So if we go ahead and remove that screw, the whole bracket and drive can be lifted out of place. Nothing too surprising there. And it is, again, nice to see that even though this ThinkPad might be lacking in many areas, one area that they certainly chose not to skimp out on was the actual magnesium alloy chassis that ThinkPads are known and loved for. Alright, ladies and gentlemen, that is pretty much the basics, unless you are removing the motherboard and everything else. I will leave the maintenance manual in the description down below, as I normally do. But let's go ahead and put this thing back together and begin our closing remarks. Alright, with that back together, let me share with you some kind of closing feelings that I have on the T431s. Should you buy one in the year 2019? Well, the answer is unfortunately going to be no. And here are kind of the reasons why. Or maybe here are the things that you would need to overcome for this machine to be the right one for you. First off, they did not make or sell as many of these as the T430, T440, pretty much any of the other mainstream T lines. So when it comes to specific parts and hardware for these, they're not exactly what you would call common. The fact that it only has one 48 watt-hour battery and it's located inside without any power bridge does mean that aftermarket battery support is not as common because it is so unique to this particular device. So you might find yourself paying quite the extra premium for some of those batteries. You've also got a limitation on your RAM and upgradability in that particular area, which is a bit unfortunate that they chose to go that route. I'm sure that they have their good reasons for it, mainly to reduce size and weight. But that being said, at the time that this was made, there were a lot of other machines that were doing the size and weight dance a little bit better than this particular unit was, which did hurt its sales, unfortunately. That and the fact that it allowed, or didn't allow, I should say, for a lot of different upgradability, the performance, the heat, there just wasn't a lot of reasons for people to purchase this, say, over the T430, which had been long since established as such an amazing piece of kit. That being said, if all of those reasons do not detract you, remember that it is still a ThinkPad. It is still ThinkPad quality. And for that very reason, if you are looking for something tough, thinner, and lighter, not necessarily more powerful, and you're willing to accept those compromises, then this is still a good computer. It just might not necessarily be a good ThinkPad. So keep that in mind. If you do see one of these and the price is low enough that you are able to forgive some of these what collectors and enthusiasts would call, quite frankly, sins, then this would actually be a good find. However, if any of that sounds like, you know what, I think I'm going to give it a pass. Then there is no harm in that. There are still plenty more T430s out there looking for a good home. So, with that being said, ladies and gentlemen, I hope that you enjoyed this video. I was very excited at the opportunity to cover what is not exactly a common machine, and also dive into some of the history behind the redesign that this machine went through, and how that would lead to the common design language that we would see Lenovo move through. And then after some community feedback, definitely backpedal on a few things. I'm looking at you, trackpad. If you enjoyed this sort of content, please feel free to do the big three. Obviously like the video. It's a thumbs up looking thing down there. If you want to see more videos as they are released, make sure you're hitting that subscribe button. That really does help spread the word of the channel. And if you think that there is someone out there that would like to learn more about the T431s or other ThinkPads or any other content featured on my channel, be sure to send the videos to them and share the content around. We are an excellent community, and I think that more people would benefit from meeting us. And when I say us, I not only mean myself, but also the fine people in the comments that share their immense wealth of knowledge, not only working with these machines, using these machines, even servicing these machines. And every time I read those stories, I'm very thankful that you've taken the time to actually share those with us. And I hope that someone watching this video will do the same in the comments very soon. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.